Good morning and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the briefing that gives you everything you need to know about British politics in under 20 minutes.
It's Wednesday, October the 2nd. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News and with me is Jack Blanchard of Politico. We are both in Birmingham for Tory Party conference, but in many ways the focus today will be on Beirut and Brussels after those extraordinary scenes last night of Iranian missiles raining down on Israel last night.
Yeah, it's starting to feel like a bit of a sideshow here at Tory conference in Birmingham, much as I've enjoyed watching the Tory party over the last few days, sort of in their throes of a leadership election. I was at a dinner last night and everyone was just leaving and they were all just looking at their phones and watching that footage of the missile attack on Tel Aviv, and it suddenly felt rather unimportant, the ups and downs of the different leadership machinations here, Sam. I'm sure it was the same for you covering it for Sky.
There was a noticeable thinning out. I actually think there might have been a noticeable thinning out even without the events of the Middle East, whisper it quietly. But I think the scenes in Israel just totally have diverted the focus. I mean, I ended up spending the evening in part under a road bridge in Birmingham responding to the Prime Minister's statement from Downing Street, emergency 8:30 statement, where he took a couple of questions about what's going on there. That just underscored where attention is. What are we going to talk about today then?
Well, we're going to have to talk about that first, the Iran's missile attack on Israel and the implications of what that means as war very quickly and clearly now escalating in the Middle East and the UK involvement in that. Then we need to talk about Keir Starmer's trip to Brussels. He is off to Brussels today for the first time as Prime Minister to discuss a reset of relations with the EU. So that's a big diplomatic moment for him. And then we will get back to events here in Birmingham. It's the final day of the Tory party conference and the leadership candidates, all four of them, will be on stage today giving their final speeches and pitches to Tory party members and MPs. So we will talk about that as well. But let's start with the Middle East, Sam, because it's such a massive story now that is happening. Why don't you just bring us up to speed on exactly what happened last night and exactly where we are this morning?
Just after 5 o'clock, 180 Iranian missiles started to rain down on Israel. Many of them were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome with the help of the US and some support from the UK, meaning that at time of speaking, it appears that there were no casualties in Israel of Israelis. There may be one Palestinian in the West Bank casualty. The retaliation by Iran came after, on Tuesday morning, Israel confirmed that it had started a ground invasion in Lebanon from the north of Israel. Israel was playing down the scale of it, insisting it was localized, but nevertheless forces going in, an important moment. After last night's rocket attacks by Iran, Israel has now vowed to respond. We are in an inevitable cycle of escalation, and the IDF are saying we will choose when to prove our precise and surprising attack capabilities, and we will attack him. Keir Starmer made an emergency statement at 8:30 in which he said we stand with Israel and that the situation was incredibly dangerous. John Healey has arrived in Cyprus. He's, of course, the Defence Secretary, and he confirmed that there was UK military involvement in the Middle East. And we understand that that's not too dissimilar to what happened in April, where Typhoon combat planes shot down Iranian drones. And now, basically, inside Downing Street, as I understand it, we are all braced for the Israeli retaliation against Iran in the next cycle of this conflict. Keir Starmer didn't go as far as the Americans on telly last night. The Americans were saying Israel has a right to respond specifically to this attack. Keir Starmer was urging de-escalation and merely saying Israel has the right to defend itself, so a small difference in nuance between the two, but I'm not sure that this is a moment for nuance because we are in a cycle of tit-for-tat escalation and nobody is quite sure how we break out of it.
No, that's completely right. And it's pretty clear that for Israel sees the best form of defense as attack. And Benjamin Netanyahu said Iran had made a big mistake last night and, quote, will pay for it. My playbook colleague Dan Bloom spoke to one UK official who was speculating that they thought Israel would likely go after the launch site of these missiles, which obviously would make some logical sense as one attack target. But everyone is expecting a significant Israeli military response to this. And, Sam, it's pretty much getting very close to a year to the day since that first horrific terror attack in Israel. And here we are now, a year on, and this is exactly what everyone in the UK government who we were speaking to at that time had feared, that this thing would escalate from a devastating terror attack into a multi-headed conflict. And we see Israel now still striking Gaza in the south, striking Lebanon, or Lebanese targets in the north, and Hezbollah targets in the north, and now Iran as well. And it's very hard to know how it's going to play out over the next few days, but it only seems to be moving in one direction. And it's worth stressing that the UK is involved in this conflict. The RAF were involved last night, shooting down these missiles, defending Tel Aviv. We'd expect that role to continue, and we should get more confirmation from the Ministry of Defence today over exactly what it was that British troops were doing. Probably those RAF jets based in Cyprus, we think, were the ones that were involved, but that may well continue if this tit-for-tat fighting carries on. The other thing to say, I think, as well, Sam, is that, Israel talking about a limited incursion in Lebanon. Well, they were talking about that back in the 1980s when it was supposed to be a limited incursion into Lebanon. That one went on for years and years and years. It's very hard to say these things are going to be short, impactful military incursions. These things can just escalate and escalate and escalate. And that is the thing that everyone in the UK government has long been worried about. And it very much feels like we are now there.
To focus on the British end, which I think we ought to do in this podcast, Keir Starmer clearly wanting to show that he's leading from the front with that 8:30 televised statement last night, making it absolutely clear which side he is on. He is on the side of Israel and backs Israel's right to defend itself. And also giving that message to the UK citizens in Lebanon to get out and get out now. And the UK government has basically got a charter plane to facilitate that, because the airports are the first casualty often in further escalation. But the question, and I'm very struck by a question by one of my Sky colleagues, Dominic Waghorn, is, yes, own the moment, but is what we've seen in the last week, if you can pull the camera back that far, actually a gigantic failure of American and Western diplomacy? Because it was only last week that the Americans and the British, fronted by Keir Starmer, and the French and others were going to Israel, do not escalate this. And within 2 days, we'd had the assassination of the Hezbollah chief, who was a massively significant figure in Lebanon and in the Middle East. And we had the ground incursion. And the fact that Israel wasn't listening, and now it appears that the US explicitly and the UK implicitly are backing Israel to retaliate again against Iran. Well, that's a world away from the objectives that those countries, us and the Americans, said that we had just a week ago. Now, it's very hard to know what alternative courses of action might have produced a different result, but you do have the spectacle of the US and the UK saying one thing and another thing happening.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think in the end, the bigger political implications are likely to be in the US than they are here. The US is always seen as the big power broker in the Middle East and in the end, and Israel's closest ally. And the US president has sort of traditionally been able to and been expected to influence the actions of the Israeli leadership, and that has just not happened this time. And we've heard these positive noises about ceasefires coming out from US officials again and again and again over recent months, and it just hasn't happened. And it was interesting and notable to see Donald Trump overnight very, very strongly attacking Kamala Harris and Joe Biden for, in his view, allowing this thing to escalate, describing them as incompetent, saying they are, quote, leading us to the brink of World War III. you have to feel that the escalation of this conflict does not reflect well on the current US leadership. They've very, very, very clearly said that they didn't want any of this to happen, and here it is playing out before our eyes. And Donald Trump is going to use that against them. And the more people feel uncertain and scared about the growing conflict over in the US, I would suggest plays quite well into Donald Trump's hands at an absolutely critical juncture in the political cycle there. Of course, voting in that election is now just 1 month away.
Also, bringing it back to British politics, it's fascinating to see Robert Jenrick specifically going several clicks more aggressive than Keir Starmer in his response. So in a statement released at 7 o'clock last night on social media, Robert Jenrick said, "Tonight we've seen a terrible and unprovoked attack against Israel by Iran." I mean, I think some would question whether or not it was unprovoked, given the assassination at the weekend. Whether or not people can think it's justified, and saying there can be no more appeasement. We must stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel, our ally, just as we have with Ukraine, and give them all the support necessary to win this war. In other words, Robert Jenrick appears to be backing the UK potentially lending, I mean, maybe up to and including military muscle to Israel to take on Hezbollah as well as Hamas, and that is not currently the position of the British government, but I think states a very clear foreign policy position for him, and that is a sort of fascinating flag planted in the ground.
Yeah, and I think, that given the way this story is moving, I think we'll all be watching all the Tory leadership contenders today, as well as Downing Street, for further reaction. Keir Starmer, as I mentioned before, is off to Brussels today for a long-planned trip to meet Ursula von der Leyen. He will be giving a sort of mini press conference in Brussels late this afternoon. We're expecting it around sort of 6 p.m. after that meeting wraps up, and it seems pretty clear to me that although lots of people will be asking questions about a new Brexit deal and all the rest of it, there will also be lots of questions about this and the UK response to this, and how closely Britain is standing shoulder to shoulder in Israel, given the way that this is all panning out. Should we talk a bit about that EU trip now, Sam? It's a very significant moment for Keir Starmer. They're sort of taken him a while to get to Brussels as Prime Minister. He's been globetrotting a fair amount since he got into Downing Street 3 months ago, but this is his first trip to Brussels. I think there's a little bit of grumpiness within the EU that it's taken this long, but here we are. He met Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, very briefly last week, but they will be having a proper sit-down conversation in Brussels for the first time today since he became Prime Minister. And of course, on the agenda is Keir Starmer's stated intention of a closer relationship with the EU, a reset of relations with the EU, and eventually some sort of formal agreement with the EU that starts to bring the two sides closer together following Boris Johnson's initial Brexit deal. And we're expecting not so much actual negotiation today. That's still some way off, and the Commission hasn't got a mandate for that, but they'll certainly be talking about the parameters of that and the things that each side is interested in.
You and I have talked several times about Keir Starmer's desire for an EU reset across all of the union. I think that grumpiness is, I've picked it up as well, and it's member states as well as the Commission. Fascinatingly, they say, don't call it a reset. We had the reset. The reset happened under Rishi Sunak. They say, if you listen to our language in the European Commission carefully, they talk about a positive agenda with the UK because we've done the reset as far as we're concerned. And that was the deals involving things like the Windsor Framework and Horizon. So they don't see quite the step change that Keir Starmer is presenting, as much as they welcome the positive tone. Please tell us what you want, seems to be the big message from Brussels, because they aren't sure. We aren't really sure. We think that there will be some kind of negotiation around a security pact, although whether or not it's as straightforward as the 2019 one that Boris nearly signed up to, it's not clear. We think that there will be something to align more closely Northern Ireland and the rest of Great Britain's kind of food and agriculture standards, known as SPS. And there's something around youth mobility potentially, but that is being treated like a very toxic issue by the British government, potentially politically unpopular, which baffles Brussels, because they think that you can offer very time-limited deals of a small number of years for young people to come and live and work in the UK in return for British kids being able to go and work across the EU, and that wouldn't pose a problem that they could see politically because it's nothing like freedom of movement. But all of these areas, the high-level sort of ambition for a change in the relationship isn't matched by the kind of concessions that the UK would be willing to give, and doesn't really look like it's going to make any difference to trade, which is the big thing that business would like to see improved in our relations with the EU.
I think there are hopes within the UK government that they can make progress on trade. They want mutual recognition of standards, which is sort of gets into rather techie Brexit territory here, but make it easier for people to sell services into the EU. And there's a possibility there might be some sort of quid pro quo there, that if Britain gets that ask, then the EU gets this thing on youth mobility and allows young people to come and work here on time-limited visas from Europe. But the problem with that is, as you say, the EU thinks it's great. They don't understand why anyone in Britain would be against that. But the truth is, look at Yvette Cooper as the Home Secretary, for example, is dead against this as an idea, because she thinks in the end it is going to add to migration numbers, and that is going to be very bad for this government if migration numbers are allowed to keep ticking up. They promised to get a handle on it. This would not help. And that basic sort of conflict between the way the EU sees it and the way UK sees it will be played out today in those talks. So it feels like there's a long way to go with this, but this is very much the starting gun on a negotiation that might take us to some sort of formal agreement next year. That is the hope on both sides, and I think it feels to me probably there will be a landing zone for some of this, but it'll be, as ever with Brexit, Sam, a slow and tortuous negotiation process that plays out in public with both sides showboating all the way through.
We're left with 2 minutes for the Tories. Now, it's meant to be possibly the biggest day of Tory party conference, yet they're squeezed to the end. I think that's a sensation that this party's going to get used to. We're both here in Birmingham. Today is the day where Tom Tugendhat, James Cleverly, Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch give 20-minute speeches plus deliver 2-minute campaign videos, all kicking off from 10:45 this morning. As we were saying yesterday, the polling of Tory members suggests that this race really is wide open. Anything could happen. This is meant to be the big moment. In so much as anybody will get to see what they say because of events in the Middle East, with attendance thinning and TV coverage elsewhere, this isn't going to be the big moment that we thought, but it still matters.
It still matters. We will see all four candidates on stage, one after another. They get 20 minutes each. It kicks off at about 10:30, 11:15 this morning. And there will be the real beauty parade, 20-minute speeches, each one designed to woo Tory members. How much the rest of the world is watching this, I have my doubts, but nevertheless, it's an important moment for the Tory party, and each one of them is looking for that game-changing moment, that thing that David Cameron famously did back in 2005 that changed the leadership contest. He was behind David Davis. He gave this now remembered as amazing speech at Tory conference at this point in the process, turned it all around and went off and, of course, became Tory leader and eventually Prime Minister. I mean, whether anyone's got it in them to pull off a moment like that feels unlikely to me. We've already seen loads of them. This is not them just suddenly emerging from the darkness to give the big speech. They've been here all week doing big speeches in different forms or Q&As and stuff. So it feels unlikely to me we'll get some magical game-changing moment today. But, of course, you never know. I think more broadly, the sense here is that it's been a pretty good conference for Robert Jenrick, in the sense that he came into it looking pretty much neck and neck with Kemi Badenoch. Your polling showed that he's closing the gap amongst members, while she is seen to have had a difficult conference for all the reasons we've talked about already, scaring the horses with some MPs with her outspoken comments on various different issues. And I would say it's been a good conference for James Cleverly too, who is now emerging as a real contender in this contest and might just sneak through into second place. And then, your polling showed that he would do be a very close contest with Robert Jenrick. So it certainly feels like things have shifted here over the last few days. I'm not sure if we'll see the big game-changing moment this morning, though.
I wonder whether the biggest thing people notice from the last 24 hours is actually not part of today's speeches, but for instance, Kemi Badenoch in an event yesterday, talking about the civil service and saying that there are 5 to 10% of them who are very bad, should be in prison bad, leaking official secrets, undermining ministers, usually union-led. I think it's fair to say I haven't misquoted it because I went back and listened to that. But people will be able to make up their own mind what they think of that. An even more serious row about Robert Jenrick. He, of course, said that the SAS were killing rather than taking. He said that the SAS were effectively killing rather than detaining terrorists because of human rights laws. Now, that appears to have unravelled. It was based on a claim by Ben Wallace last year, who said the UK takes lethal action rather than raiding and detaining terror suspects because you can't render them. But he was referring to drone strikes and kinetic airstrikes. And I think it's fair to say special forces are very cross at the idea that they are going around killing terrorists rather than doing what they're supposed to. Tom Tugendhat came out and condemned this last night. He said he recognised one of the individuals in Robert Jenrick's video. They were a friend of his. He knew them in 2002. And shortly after that video was filmed, that individual was killed in an accident, and urged Robert Jenrick to take the video down. So pretty heart-rendering stuff there in a difficult moment for Robert Jenrick.
There are different levels of gaffe in a Tory leadership contest, but picking a fight with the special forces, with the SAS, that's a pretty high level of gaffe, I would say. Anyway, Sam, we are out of time for today. Lovely chatting to you. I will see you back in London tomorrow when all of this is at an end.
See you then.